So earlier when we talked about bias, we took 6 reading and we found out that the average was 101 as against the reference value of 100 psi. So what will happen is, next time if you take any measurement, you know that this particular measurement has 1 psi as the bias. So next time, let's say you find out any value, let's say you find out that the pressure is 122, you find out the average as 122, you know that there is a bias of 1 psi. So what you will do is, you will deduct that 1 psi from the measured average, and from that you will guess that the true value instead of 122, let's say, would be 121 psi, because there is a bias of 1 psi. That's how you used bias. But now what's linearity? Linearity is the measurement of bias across the operating range of a tool or instrument. What does that mean? So what does this mean is that when we took the measurement and the average was 101, and for that the bias was 1 psi. This bias changes over the range of measurement. Let's say if the gauge which you were using, this could take measurement from 0 to 500 psi. So at 100 psi, you know that the bias is 1, and you assume that bias will be 1 across all these ranges. So there is a problem with the 1 psi. So anytime if you take a measurement, you deduct 1 from that. But that might be different at different points in that whole range. The bias might be more when it comes to 500 psi. If that is the case, then that is the case of linearity. So if the bias was 1 psi across every measurement, then you can say that this instrument has a bias. But then if the bias changes as the measurement changes, then that's the linearity problem. Let's understand the linearity problem more on the next slide with the help of an example there. So here I have the similar example where the gauge which I was using with 100 psi, which was here, my reference value was 100 psi, and the average of 6 measurements which I took comes out to be 101, and based on that I said that the bias is 1 psi. Similar thing I do at different points in that measurement range. So this particular gauge was from 0 to 200. So I take 6 measurements, let's say at 0 psi, 50 psi, 6 measurements at 100 psi, at 150 and 200. So I take 6 measurements at each of these points and I find out the bias of that. But now here I see in this case is that bias is different. Bias is not 1 psi at all these points. So that means it's not the bias. There is a linearity problem as well, and that I can plot here, that how bias changes over the range of this. If you are using the weighing machine in your house where you take the measurement of your weight, so you know that there is a 0 error. So you can adjust that. So if nobody is standing on that weighing machine and that machine still shows, let's say 2 kg, then you know that this machine has a bias of 2 kg. So that was the bias. Linearity is different. Linearity is how this bias changes over the full range of the measurement. So with this, now we have covered 2 measurements of accuracy. One is the bias and the second is linearity. Now we are left with one more, which is stability. Let's talk about that on the next video.